Now, you may recall that a while back I paid a visit to the Colne Valley Viaduct, currently under construction for High Speed 2. Well, recently I received another invitation to High Speed 2 to look at a couple of other sites. If you've been following the news in Britain over the past few months, you'll know that a lot has changed for High Speed 2. Long story short, the northern section of the line from Birmingham to Manchester has been scrapped. This follows the earlier scrapping of the Leeds leg. The line will now only go from London to Birmingham. For those involved in building that section, though, it's very much business as usual, which is good for me because it means I get a video out of it. I suppose it's also good for the people working on High Speed 2. I was invited to the sites of the Tame Valley, the Wendover Dean, and the Small Dean viaducts. The Tame Valley should absolutely not be confused with the Thames Valley, although I am informed that at least one journalist did in fact make that mistake. The parts of the viaduct are manufactured off-site. In fact, it's the first viaduct in Britain to be constructed entirely using parts manufactured off-site. The press release compares it to Lego, although it reminded me of my nephew's Brio trains. What you have are piers set into the ground. Then the 25-metre-long, 90-ton beams are lifted into place. Then they're secured together with steel rods. Then the decking will be laid on top, upon which the track will sit. We were fortunate enough to be allowed to watch a beam being put into place. You can't hear it in this footage, but a couple of the cameramen next to me were squabbling while this was happening, which I thought was funny. The total length of the viaduct is 880 metres, or 2,887 feet. The method of construction was previously used on the Spanish high-speed rail network. This viaduct was designed by Moxon, who have some form with railway works. They were the folk who rebuilt Coldrops Yard in King's Cross. Actually, they also designed the other two viaducts we'll be looking at. Wendover Dean is a different beast. This time, design cues were taken from the high-speed viaducts of the TGV system in France. The way it works is this. You have a couple of lengths of steel girder. This was manufactured in France and delivered in sections, each one 25 metres long and weighing 40 tons. These are welded together on site, then sandwiched between two layers of reinforced concrete. This approach is known as double composite. Steel is flexible, so it's good for applications where there is a degree of tension. Concrete is anything but flexible. Its great strength is under compression. Double composite construction is kind of the best of both worlds and means that the minimum amount of each material is needed, because each material is playing to its strengths. Meanwhile, the piers are under construction. Piles are driven into the ground, followed by a lattice framework of steel. This is surrounded by hollow concrete shells which are manufactured in Northern Ireland. More concrete is then poured into the shells to create a solid, reinforced structure. For the top section, they flip things around. The shell goes on first, then they drop the framework into it. This is kind of a simplified version of how it works, but once all the piers are built, what happens then is they slide that completed girder out along the piers. Once all that's done, the concrete deck will be assembled on top, and then you've got your railway line. Unfortunately, on the day we visited, high winds had brought a stop to the major construction works. But I hope this CGI demonstrates what's going on. Small Dean, which should not be confused with my mate Big Dean, is constructed in much the same way as Wendover Dean, this time being 345 metres long. By the time we got here, it was pouring with rain, so apologies for the grimness of the footage here. What complicates matters is that it crosses the Chiltern Main Line and the A413 main road. During construction, the road is going to be wiggled about, diverted back and forth to enable the viaduct to be built around it. While the design of these viaducts is impressive, they also act as something of an object lesson in how high-speed rail is built in Britain, and why it's so hard to get it done. Now, to put my cards on the table, I am in favour of high-speed rail. When I did my last video on High Speed 2, I had a number of comments suggesting that either poor old Jago had been tricked into having a positive opinion, or that I had in fact been paid to say nice things. I was not, but in the interests of full disclosure, I will state that they gave me a coffee and a Danish pastry. And I think it takes more than that to buy my goodwill. Like, we're talking at least a chocolate eclair. But yes, I feel like it should come as no surprise that a railway enthusiast would be enthusiastic about rail. So that's all that out of the way. The civil engineering on High Speed 2 has had to be designed not only with the needs of a modern high-speed railway in mind, but with the need to appease people living in the local area. It's no secret that this project has been somewhat controversial, and one of the biggest controversies has been objections from residents of the areas that High Speed 2 is intended to pass through, and the MPs for those areas are in a position to put pressure on government, who, in turn, have put pressure on High Speed 2 to make changes. Consequently, the route and the structures have been designed to provide minimal disruption, either physical, environmental, or visual. So, for instance, the line will mostly run in a tunnel under the Chilterns. These viaducts have been designed in such a way that they will, hopefully, be fairly unobtrusive. They feature noise suppression barriers. At a distance they are invisible from most angles, and the materials chosen, particularly the steel, should weather in a way that helps them blend into the background. Low-carbon construction methods have been chosen that will minimize the environmental impact. Even the tops of the piers have been designed to obscure the fastenings to make the viaducts look more elegant. However, all these tunnels and viaducts that have had to be put in, have come at a cost, literally. And that leads on to what is undoubtedly the biggest controversy surrounding High Speed 2, and ultimately the reason for the cancellation for the northern legs: the price tag. From a projected budget of £55 million in 2015, the costs rose to £106 billion in 2020. Now, the requirement to please everyone isn't the only reason the costs have risen, but let's be honest, tunnels ain't free. None of this is intended to detract from the achievements of this project. To design elegant, visually unobtrusive and environmentally friendly structures is a lot to ask under any circumstances. I hope at least I've given you a bit of an inside look into what goes into the process of building High Speed 2, and perhaps a little on-the-ground insight into a complex and controversial issue. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I am planning on covering High Speed 2 again in the future, so do look out for that. In particular, I've also paid a visit to Old Oak Common, which, for an urban rail nut like me, is especially interesting, so I'll be taking a more detailed look at that and the approach to central London in, hopefully, the not-too-distant future. I would like to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the concrete pier to my steel girder. I would also like to thank the guys at High Speed 2 for all their assistance, and the coffee and Danish. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.